The Heilige Gemara. Should I check my voice? I'll check my voice just to be sure. Sometimes it doesn't work. Testing, 1, 2, 3. We are in business. Hashoichet ve'amayla b'chutz. We know there's an iser of shchutei chutz. There's an iser to be makriv a behema b'chutz. Moti, can I trouble you to peace plus for that chumash? The Gemara today, we're going to go through these psukim, and it's going to be a little bit difficult to understand unless we see the order of the psukim. I just want to quickly review the parsha, and then it should be much simpler for us to understand the Gemara's layout of the psukim. I believe it's Vayikra Yud Zayin, right? Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor, Daber el Aharon Velmonov, Vel Kol B'nei Yisrael, V'yamart Aleihim, Zeh Davar Asher Tziv Hashem Lemor, Ish Mi Beis Yisrael, Asher Yishchat Shorei Kesef Ve'ez B'machane. The shechita was done where it's supposed to be done. Asher Yishchat B'chutz L'machane. Ve'al Pas, I'm sorry, B'machane means not in the Beis Hamikdash. Also in the Machane, but not in the Beis Hamikdash. This is the Mishkan, I guess. He didn't bring the carbon to the Mishkan, rather he shechted it out of the Mishkan. It's called Shchutei Chutz. Lack of carbon Lashem, Lofnei Mishkan Hashem, Dom Yechashev L'ishahu. This is a violation just like killing. Dom Shafach, V'nichres Ha'ishahu Mikarav Amoy, such a person is Chayiv Kars. Laman, why? Asher Yaviu B'nei Yisrael Zevachim B'Shem Zoyfim Al Pnei Asada. The carbonates that they were now bringing up now, Sada, Ve'aviyum Lashem, they should bring them to Hashem al Pesach al Moed al Akayim. V'zavchu zivchei shlomim laHashem Oisa. V'zarek Akayim is Adam al Mizbach Hashem Pesach al Moed Victor Chelav L'Rech L'Chayach. Then the pasuk goes on. V'lo yizbuchoid, it's somewhat repetitive. V'lo yizbuchoid es Zevachim la'asir b'Hashem Zoydim Achayim. You shall no longer shecht Zevachim to the Avodah Zarah. Chukas oilam tilhem l'dayroisam. And then again, Valayim Tomer Ishish B'Beis Yisrael Menager Sheyogim V'Sacham V'Sheyala Oila Yishabach V'Al Pesach Al Moed Lo Yivienu L'Asa Zosei L'Hashem V'Nichashem Me'amav. It seems like it's saying the same Torah over again. V'Shish B'Beis Yisrael, then it goes into the Isra V'Chilas Dam. So just to summarize, we have the Torah says if you eat it, you'll chayiv kares. So that is an oynish. There's no asara here. We know you have to have an oyn. In order to have an oynish, you have to have an asara. You have to have a lav. So pasuk Gimel and Daled talk about what happens if you do it. You get kares, but it doesn't say the lav. The next pasuk L'man asher yaviv b'nei Yisrael sofchem b'shem zoychim al pnei asada. This is not a lav either. It might be an asay, but it's not a lav. Then it says v'lo yizbuchu oides sofchem asirim. Now we have a lav. Okay, Gavaldik. But and then again, you have another Azor. You only have one lav of a lo yizbuchu. Now we're going to learn one more pasuk that is in Dvarim Yud Beis Yud Gimel, and that's going to be a second lav. Dvarim Yud Beis Yud Gimel. It says over here, Hishomer lecha pen. That's a lotion of lav, right? Pentala loisecha b'chol makom asher tira. Pentala does not mean. Oh, not focus on the right words. Hishomer lecha pentala loisecha b'chol makom asher tira. Tala doesn't mean shchita. Tala means halah, putting it on the mizbech, right? So there's two things we're talking about: the prohibition and the chiv kares for shechting b'chutz, and the prohibition and einish of ha'alah al b'chutz. Now let's see how this all comes together. Zok Teilige Mishnah. Hashechet v'mayla b'chutz. If you're sai shechet and sai mayla b'chutz, you do both on the same carbon b'chutz. Meaning you already shechted it b'chutz, the carbon's already possible, and now you're mayla b'chutz. State in Mishnah, chayiv al hashchita v'chayiv ha'hala. You chayiv both. If it's b'shagi, you'll be chayiv 2 karbanis chatas. Rabbi Yosy Glili Omer, shachat b'fnim v'hela b'chutz. What if the shchita was b'fnim? It was a kosher shchita. The hela b'chutz, and you only were milet b'chutz, chayiv. That makes sense. You'll be chayiv once for Allah b'chutz. What about shachat b'chutz v'hela b'chutz? Then you're potter on the hala. You know why? Shaloi hela elo davar posel. The carbon that he was milet b'chutz was already posel because it had already been shechted b'chutz. Yes, Rabbi Yosy argues. Amrullah, they told him, if that's how you're going to perceive it, then ava sheichet b'fnim u'ma'ile b'chutz, you shouldn't be chayav for Allah. Because kivin shaitziyah postlay. Yes, you shechted it b'fnim, but we know if you take one of the ivarim outside of the azar, it becomes possible. So it became possible anyway. So you see, it doesn't matter if it becomes possible. You're chayav for Allah b'chutz. Zok tehil gemor vayter, the Mishnah vayter, hatamei she'achal, a person who was tamei, who ate bein kodesh bein tamei. Say if he eat the bein kodesh tamei, bein kodesh tar. Say if he ate a carbon that was tamei, or if he ate a carbon that was tar, chayiv. But Rabbi Yosy Glili Omer, tamei shachal tar would be chayiv. But the tamei shachal tamei is potter. Why shaloi achal ela davar tamei? Anyway, he ate something that was tamei. Anyway, and the psukim, we learned from the psukim that only something that would otherwise have been mutter to eat is also to eat because you're tamei. But if anyway it's possible because it's tamei, then if you were tamei, there's no chiyuv kars for eating it. Okay, weiter. If you ask the glili tamei shachal tar is chai, but the tamei shachal tamei is potter shaloi achal el davar tamei. What he ate was tamei anyway; it wasn't right to eat. Amar loy, they told him, and that's how you're going to look at it. Dinav tamei shachal asatar kivin shenaga by tamasai. The moment he touched it, he was matamet. So I bazoi. How could you ever be chayiv? But the tar shachal tamei, everybody agrees is potter. She'ein chayiv el al tamasagov. You're chayiv if you eat a carbon when you're tamei. You're not chayiv if you eat a carbon when the carbon is tamei. This machlokes really has nothing to do with our sugya. It's only brought here because there's a machlokes of Yosy Glili and the Chachamim similar to that of our Mishnah, and the arguments are sort of the same. Zok tehela gemara. Yishlom hella. I understand why hella there's a chiv kars. Ksiv einish. We've already illustrated in the pasuk the einish tells you chiv kars. Ksiv asara. Einish the ksiv v'al pesach oihel moed lo yevianu. Asara, where's the lav? The ksiv we have to go to Devarim to find the lav. Yishamer lecha pen tyler l'secha. V'chiyad amar Rabban Rabbi Lozer kol makim shenemer hishamer pen va'al. And here it says Hishamer and pen together. Eino ela loisesa. It means a loisesa. Zoktamer l'shchita bishlam einish. We have the einish for the shchita. Dichsev al pesach al moed la'avil. Ela asar min Allah. And where's asar? Everything Gemara Amakra. We saw it right there in the pasuk. It says v'lo yizbechoy. V'lo yizbechoy means that you thou shall not check. Zokt Gemara, but that's not available to teach you the lav of a regular shchutei chutz, because haimi boile lechadir belazar. That v'lo is needed to tell you an important halacha, so you don't have it available to be the lav for the einish of shchutei chutz. The Omar, because what did Rabbi Loza say? How do you know that if you shecht a behemoth to the merkulas? Now, the way you're supposed to serve the merkulas is in a very disrespectful manner. You're supposed to throw stones at it. So if you bring a carbon to the merkulas, you're not being labeled it properly. You're not following the proper of Abdus instructions. So how do you know that shchita is like a universal isser? That even if you did it to the merkulas, shu chayiv. Remember, the pasuk mentioned lasirim. People should no longer shech to avoid desire. That means you're not allowed to shech to avoid desire, even if that is not to prescribe the avoid for that avoid desire. So you can't shech for a balpar, you can't shech for makulas, even though they themselves, Kivayachal, don't see nachas from it because they need. The Balpor says, "Vustaf hakarb nuchtav hagitne verzeist." I need to get ashayusa. I said, "Dr. Gemara weiter." Imenia inin lichadarka. We don't need a pasuk to tell us that it's also to do avodah zarah in the prescribed fashion that this Azara normally has. You know why? Because the pasuk already says in the Varim, "Tichsiv echa yavdu." I want to make sure I got the right. Yes, in the Varim, echa yavdu. The Klal Yisrael said, "Why can't we do the avodah zarah like the goyim do?" Meaning, we want to do the same practices that they do. So the Gemara, the Torah says that's very prohibited. So we know already if you service an avodah zarah in its prescribed method, that there's a chiv misa. So therefore, the Lo Yizbechu should say it's also to make a Zevicha even on a carb, even on a Getchka and a avodah zarah, who Zevicha is not its prescribed avodah. Amar Rabba, not a problem, because in V'lo Yizbechu Oid, I have two lemud. Karibei V'lo Yizbechu, and also V'kribei V'lo Oid. So V'lo Yizbechu, you shouldn't check l'avodah zarah. V'lo Oid, and not only that, so there's two lavin that are incorporated into V'lo Yizbechu. Fact Gemara, okay, fine, but we have another thing. We have a third limud that we rely on this pasuk for. Ikam avoy lechedetanya. At kan have a medaber b'kachim shekdishim b'shas ishur rabamais v'krim b'shas ishur rabamais. You up until a certain area in the pasuk, we'll get to the exact place in the pasuk. The pasuk is talking about Adam Mikra Zed Lo Yizbechu. Up until the pasuk of Lo Yizbechu, that we are currently discussing, Kol Ha'inyan Elyon Shenenash Kares Al Shchitas Chutz V'Alos Chutz. All the psukim that talk about getting kares for Shchutei Chutz and Alos Chutz is speaking about when you were makdish the animal, it was already prohibited to be makriv on the bama. So b'shas hakdeisha, it's already designated to be placed on the mizbeach and not anywhere else. Maybe that's where the Torah tells you the Isser and the Chiv Kares. Zogt, the Gemara turning on Amud Beis, Sharai Ein Shamamar, the Einish for these karbanis, we know. Zogt Rashi, Kilometer Mistamim, Behu Mishtoi Kro Lesa. Pashtus, the Torah is speaking about those cases, that you makdish a carbon after it's no longer allowed to be placed on the bama. And the Torah says what you have to do. And therefore v'nirchasa. But as hara, what's the law to tell you that if the carbon was niskadish after bombas were already outlawed, where's ashara? But mikan ve'elech from the pasuk of Lo Yizbechu Oid, you know what we're talking about? Is Zevachim shekdeishon b'shas heter abomis. But the krivim b'shas isra abomis. When you were originally makdish them, you were makdish them al manas, and properly and legally, you were makdish them al manas to be makdish them on abama. Suddenly the Raga told that from under you, and bomis are no longer allowed because we were mitzvah that even those karbanis you have to be makdish only on the mizbeach. So mikan ve'elach, when it says Lo Yizbechu B'zvachim shekdeishon b'shas heter abomis, but v'krivon b'shas iser abomis shenemar. What does it say in the pasuk of Lo Yizbechu? It says Lo Yizbechu oid esevchem lasir mashem zoivchem achareim chuk asoylom. And then the very next pasuk is Lo Yizbechu, and therefore. Where do we have it? I'm getting information over here. Okay, I'm in the wrong pasuk. I'm in the Varim. I got to go back to the Iki inside. That's what. Here we are. Here it says, "V'lo yizbechu oid is a frame La Seirim Hashem Zanim Acharem, Chugas Olam. We don't want you anymore to be makriv la Seirim. Gewaltig. So what does the Gemara say? Shenemar leman ashiyaviu b'nei Yisrael asefchem Hashem zayfchem, which is the pasuk before it. Before Belizbuch it says leman ashiyaviu b'nei Yisrael asefchem Hashem zayfchem al pnei asada aviu Hashem. Since HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from now on all karbanos to be hukrab l'Hashem, not b'chutz, therefore there's a Isra lo yizbechu later on b'yizbechu. So zok to Gemara. Shenemar leman hashivu b'nei Yisrael sefchem Hashem zoyfchem. What does it mean sefchem Hashem zoyfchem? Pashut shot is any korban that you bring should be brought on the mizbeach. No, it means the Zevachim she'ertati lecha kvar al pnei asada. The Zevachim that up until now were mutter to have been brought al pnei asada on a boma, even though you were makdash it, almanas to be makdash on a boma because there was no Isser Bomish yet. Loy malach azevech b'shas Isser Abomois, if you shecht b'shas Isser Abomois, even if you were makdish b'shas Heter Abomois, all of akasav, mala of akasav, kilo hikra al pnei asada, as if he was makdish in the field. And then it says v'aviyim l'Hashem. What should you do? You should be haviyim l'Hashem. You should bring these karbanos to the Rabbanim Shloim. Zu mitzvah sasei. So that's just a mitzvah sasei. We still need a loisasa for it. Loisa samignayin. Talmud loy mebel yiv zechot. So let's stop a second. Let's do our inventory. If the first half was speaking about Shas Isra Bamas, you were makdashit b'shas Isra Bamas. There the Torah says you're not allowed to shecht. You're not allowed to be mala. If you shecht, you're chayiv kurs. If you're mala, you're chayiv kurs. Then the Torah continues and says, if you were makdashit b'shas heter bamas, there's still a lav of lo yizbechu, and there's still an assay of haviyum lashem. Yachal ye'anish karish. You might think, just like in the first half, when you were makdashit after the isra for bamas, there's a chiyuv karis. So too, if you were makdashit before the isra bamas, if you shechted it or you were makdashit it on the bama, you'd also be chayiv karis. Dr. Gemara Talmud Loymar, chukas oilam tia zois lahem l'deiraisa. Zois, exactly as specified in the Torah for such karbanos that you were makdish before the Isser Bamais, there's an assay and a loisasa. The Zois lahem, however, they don't get the other punishment of karis. That punishment is a reserve for only kochim that you were makdish originally, b'shas Isra Bamais. Whatever the case is, lo yizbechu is tied up. So how could you say lo yizbechu is available to teach us the lav for shchit chutz? Zog to Gemara, Ella, Omar, I believe it's Abaye. I think the Aleph says Abaye, yeah. Ella Omar Abaye, kal v'chayim. You know how we know an Isser lav to shecht b'chutz? Uma b'mokim shaloi onash hizer, madich b'mokim shaloi onash hizer. Madich, there's a lav, even when there's no chiv kares, meaning if you were makdashit before the Isser B'mois, we know there's a lav in the say, but there's no chiv kares. But we know that there's a lav, madich b'mokim shaloi onash, meaning when you were makdashit b'shas heter b'mois. Hizer, there's a lav, mokim sha'onash, where the Torah says you chayiv kares for it. If you make shchut echutz on an animal that you were makdish, but Isser Abamos, Eino din she'Isser, surely there's a law for it. So basically, we are being mazir minadin. Now that contradicts the world-renowned klal of ein masir minadin. So the Gemara is going to get to that. You're right, but I have a better right. Im kain, I'm sorry. So we have the Gemara just now made a kal v'chomer to prove the lav and the lav, but shchut echutz when it's you were makdashit be'isser, you were makdashit be'isser b'mois, is only learned on Kal V'chomer. Frank the Gemara, if you're going to open up this new idea that Lavin can be learned from a Kal V'chomer, it's going to expose you to a whole litany of kashas. Zog the Gemara, if that's the case, Lo Yomer Lav V'chela. Why B'chlal is there a lav of Lo Seichel Chela? V'teisi Kal V'chomer min nevela. We could learn that there's a lav tit chela from the fact that there's a lav tit nevela. Because man nevela shlo yonash, malach nevela, where there's no chiv karish of eat nevela. You're not allowed to eat it, but there's no chiv karish. Nevertheless, hizer, we say there's a lav to do it. Chelav she'anas. Chelav, if you eat it, you're chayiv karish. Eino din she'yi hizer. Surely that there's a lav. So based on your svara, a whole bunch of lavin we could have learned out of a Kal V'chomer. So you wouldn't be able to learn it from a Kal V'chomer, from nevela. Why? The nevela is matame, but the chelav is not tame. So therefore, the reason why nevela has a lav is because it's matame. Chelav does not have chumrah. Okay, so we can learn chelav is also from shrotzim tmein, from shrotzim that are tame. No shrotzim that are you allowed to eat except for the chavdam. When we say shrotzim tmein, meaning the list of shrotzim that are tame, they're tame b'mashu. Mal shrotzim, you can't be right from shrotzim. What would the right from shrotzim be? Madach over there, where there's no chiv korish of you eat them. Yet there's a lav kol shekein chelav. So the Gemara can say mal shrotzim mitamin tamein. I mean shem mitamin b'mashu. They have a chumer that they'll be mitamin b'mashu, and chelav doesn't have that. So the Gemara means shrotzim toyer, and Rashi says shrotzim toyer doesn't mean shrotzim that you're allowed to eat. It means shrotzim that don't have too much shrotzim when they die. Rashi gives the example of either a frog or an ant. They don't become tummy when they die. Frank the Gemara, mal shrotzim tohirim, sheisurim b'mashu. They're also b'achila b'mashu, which chelav is only usher with a kizayis. So I come, okay, we can't learn it from these places. Maybe we can learn chelav from the isser of orla and klai haker. They are not chayiv korish if you eat them. Yet there's a lav, so kol shekin chelav. The Gemara mal orla klai cherem shekein asurim b'ana. They have another chumer. They're asabana. Zok Gemara learning from shviyas. Madach shviyas you're not allowed to eat, but it's just a lav. Kol shekin chelav that's chayiv korish. There should be a lav. Mal shviyas shekein tefeses dameha. Shvius, if you redeem it, it's going to be, the kedusha will be chal on the money that was paid for it. Chelav, there's no such thing as redemption. Okay, so Gemara mitruma, madach truma, there's no chiv kares to eat it. Yet there's a lav, kol shekein chelav. So Gemara, no, shekein lehuta mechloloi. Chelav by a tzvi is mutter. So there's some types of chelav that are mutter. There is no type of truma that's mutter. Zok Gemara, how about you make a ma'atzad using the entire list that we just listed off one at a time? All these isurim are never mutter. It's never mutter to eat a shirt. It's never mutter to eat noiser. It's never mutter to eat nevela. But sometimes it's a mutter to eat chelav. Where? If it's the chelav of a tzvi. So therefore, we don't have any other Kal V'chomers. The Kal V'chomer that we do have is madach, where there's no chiv kares, on shchutei chutz, where you were makdish the carbon b'shes heter b'amitz, yet there's a lavin in the say, kol shekain, the shchutei chutz that comes with an iser kares, and that means you were makdish the animal after it was already usher to be makam b'amitz, kol shekain, there's a lav over there. But amarava ikashali hakashali. If you want to have a kasha, this is a good kasha. Hadit nan, it says Pesach Umila is an assay. I ask, Taisi b'Kal V'chomer mi moiser. The halach is, why do I need a lav, or why do I need a chiv asay of Pesach and a chiv asay of Mila? We know that if you violate the chiv asay of Pesach and if you violate the chiv asay of Mila, we know that you're chayiv kares. So why don't you learn that there's a chiv asay to bring a korban Pesach? There's a chiv asay to be mali your child, to be mali yourself. From a Kal V'chomer, from moiser, it's law. You're not allowed to make moiser, right? Ma moiser shaloy anish. It says v'loy sasur mimenu ad boiker. It's also to leave moiser, but there's no chiv kares if you are over that Avera, nevertheless, there's a law for it. Pesach Amila, She'anash, Pesach Amila, there's a chi of course if you don't do it. Eino din shehizr, surely there should be a law for it. Amar Rav Ashi, Amriza l'shemai to come to Rav Kahana, I presented this problem, this question to Rav Kahana and to ask him why do we need an assay for Pesach and for Milah? Why don't you learn it from Akav Chemer, from Noisar? V'yamar li mi Moiser layasa. You wouldn't be able to learn it out of Moiser, of the Isser to leave Noisar. The Ikal Mivrich Mala Moiser shekin ein loy takan. If you make something Noisar, it parcels the animal permanently. You can never fix it. Timer Pesach, she used to the kana. Pesach, if you miss this Pesach, you bring a Pesach Sheni as a kula. Therefore, you would never know that there's an Isser from Akav Chemer, so you only could rely on the pasuk specifically stating that is. So now back to our kasha. How is it possible that Abaye would say that the whole makar of alav of shchutei chutz by a case where you were makdish it already, b'shas isur b'mais, you know it's from a Akav Chemer, from a shchutei chutz which has alav, shchutei chutz where you were makdish it b'shas heter b'mais. Zok to Gemara, afil l'man da'amar oinchim min adin, ein masir min adin. Even if you hold oinchim min adin, everybody holds ein masir min adin. Even if you could bring a ride at the chi of chorus to A because of what we learned at B, you or malchus or whatever it would be, you cannot learn that the balt is a lav here. You have a kavachomer that there should be a lav there. Everybody agrees that ein masir min adin. Elo zok to Gemara. You're right, we cannot rely on the Kavachomer. In fact, it's a lot more than the Kavachomer. It's a much more concrete type of drasha. The Amar, you know what he said? Asya hava hava. Now, hava is not really a word that's used. Hava means danentening, bringing it, meaning the shchuta and the halach, chutz, from before and after the Isser b'mais. So hava shchita and mehala. We learn shchutei chutz from hala b'chutz, and they're both referred to hava because they're both bringing something when you're not supposed to. So zok Rashi, ksiv b'shchita lo yeviu, uksiv b'hala lo yevienu. So I just looked myself up. It does have a lashon of ava, sai by shchita and sai by ava. When it's talking about the chi of kares, it says if you didn't bring it in, it says el pesach ayel moed lo yevia. This is talking about shchita, and then later on it says el pesach ayel moed lo yevienu. So it uses the same nusach sai by shchutei chutz and sai by ha'allah b'chutz. And therefore, these words are extra. Of Yivienu Yavoy, you can't ask a kash on it. Lakach, Harei, Kimisha Mefurish Behen, the Ein Zeb Min Adin Kikavakoimer, Shadim Dame Atzmoy, it's a Gzeir Shava. From Hallah B'chutz to Shchita B'chutz, just like Hallah B'chutz, we have a lav, so too there will be a lav to shchutei chutz. Zok to Gemara, mal Allah lo onish elam came hizer, afkan lo onish elam came hizer. Note 640. Rava Omar, Rava says, Kider Rab Yoina. And we have another makar for the lav for shchutei chutz. And it's like what Rab Yoina said. Asya, shame, or sham. Mal Allah lo onish elam came hizer, afkan lo onish elam came hizer. What is the sham? Zok to Gemara, Zok Rashi, the Amar B'yoyna Amar Kra Sham Tala Oileisecha, V'Sham Tala Ishkis Shar Asiyos Lahalo. So in that one pasuk, Sham Tala Oileisecha V'Sham Tasa, we are comparing every ma'aseh done by a carbon to the halah. And we say Ma ha'alah lo onish elam ken hizer because we had a pasuk for it. Av shchita lo onish elam ken hizer. That is the Shita of Yoina. And then, Zok Gemara, Achikon Mukteriptim. So now we have what we need. But we only have what we need by muktere panim shahelam b'chutz. Things that were supposed to be hukrav b'fnim in the mizbeach, and instead you were marked them b'chutz. We know that there is a chi of karis and there's an iser lav to do this. But what about muktere chutz shahelam b'chutz? What if it's muktere chutz shahelam b'chutz? Meaning you shechted it b'chutz already. If you shechted it b'chutz already, how do you know there'll be a lav to be malak b'chutz? Zok Rashi. Ad shechan muktere pnim shahelam b'chutz. Shchutei pnim shahayu oimdim laktirim b'fnim. They were kosher kabanis. V'helam b'chutz chayiv. You have psukim for that. K'dichsiv b'halah v'al moed lo yivienu. Beruyin lavion lefnim ula loishna kosher b'daber. Of course, the pasuk is only talking about a kosher carbon, but mukter echutz, where shchut echutz, she'aynim likata bechutz v'loy b'fnim, shchut echutz, like Rabbi Yosy Glulis Taina, that's possible already. How do the Chacham know that even though it's possible already, there'll still be a iser halah b'chutz? Zok to Gemara, Amar Rav Kana Amar Kra, va'aleim taimar. Rashi tells us, Aleim Taimer Zeu Tchilas Parshas Halah Usmucha LaParshas Shchut Echutz. So we say Al Rishonim the Mishtoi B'Shchut Echutz She'amar Shem Helu B'Chutz Chayiv Aleim Karina. So let's see what exactly that means. The first chelik of this drasha is speaking about Asher Yishchat Shoykes Avayishet B'Chutz LaMach. So this is Shchut Echutz, but this is only the Ashara. The oynish is not asara, right? Did you get karis laman hashayavu? And then it goes weiter and says va'aleim taimar, and then it introduces the isra of Allah b'chutz. Va'aleim taimar ishish v'shom neger ashayala oilozov v'chiteng about Allah. So va'aleim means to tell us you make believe that there's no aleph there. Make believe there's an ayin there. Va'aleim, whatever I'm saying about the next parsha, about Allah b'chut, that there's a lav, v'aleim timer, tell them too. Tell them upstairs, tell them by shchut echutz that it has the same halacha. So Zok to Gemara, it says v'aleim timer to say Allah Samukin. It's going on the parsha that's near it. As Rashi says, v'aleim timer, zeu tchilas parsha Allah Samucha, la parsha shchut echutz, al rishonim d'shmoy b'chut echutz, Shama Shem Helu B'chutz Chayiv Aleim Queen. That's what it's referring to. Zok to Gemara, that's a very nice shot, but it doesn't say that in the pasuk. Masach of Alarava, Miksiv Aleim with an ayin, Vayleim Ksiv mean tell Klal Yisrael. It doesn't mean it's going back on the previous parsha. Ella, in order to find a makar, that even if it was already shechted aside and the carbon is possible, there's still a isra karis of Allah b'chutz. We know it from Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel, V'aleim Taimer teaches us la'arev parshiyos. That tells us to mix the parshiyos. It's the vav. It's the vav moisif al yini rishon u'ma'arev parshiyos loimer shav shchut echutz shalom b'chutz chayiv. It's V'aleim Taimer, even if it was already shechted b'chutz. If you now were malet b'chutz, there will be a chiyuv. Ma'alalad miktar echutz, avkan miktar echutz. One more line. A mask of a Rabibi. Haditan shloishim u'sheish krisos b'Torah. The Mishnah says, you know how many averes there are that are chayav kares? 36. But the problem is, if there's shchita b'chutz and then subsequently halah b'chutz, and there's two separate lavin, so abizai tlosin v'shav havyan. There's actually 37. V'ika hamayla v'amayla. Right? You have a mayla b'chutz if it was shechted inside, and you have a mile b'chutz if it was shechted outside. Zok Gemara, kasha. No, we'll have to live with that kasha. Okay, we will stop here, Be'ez Hashem, and we'll be mamshich tomorrow.